The purpose of the Flick-Reedy Education Enterprises is to promote individual moral responsibility through education. How do we do this? We study and discuss the interrelationships of history, philosophy, social studies, and economics. We do not dictate. We do not make statements as to what we think you should or should not do. We do not unduly burden this program with footnotes, references, or complete documentation. However, we do give sufficient data to bring this discussion into proper focus. We invite you to delve further into the necessary historical and statistical data to develop a deeper understanding of truth and a keener sense of individual moral responsibility.
In previous sessions, we have discussed the two worlds in general. We noted that while the forces of regimentation have challenged freedom throughout history, one of the most recent forms of regimentation to challenge freedom is that of Marxian atheism, more commonly known as world communism. It will be our purpose to look at Marxian atheism in a calm and factual manner, neither underestimating its dangers to our freedom, nor becoming irrational and frightened of what they would have us believe is the invincible world movement. We will cut it down to proper size with the armor of knowledge and truth. Let's start by seeing how it's been defined. Webster says, "Communism is any system of social organization in which goods are held in common." The Encyclopedia Americana states, "Communism is a system of social theory and organization based upon the vesting of all property in the community, each member working according to his capacity and being rewarded according to his needs." Now consider the definition of J. Edgar Hoover, head of our Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. He said,
"Communism is more than an economic, political, social, or philosophical doctrine. It is a way of life, a false materialistic religion."
Much has been said and written about the worldwide communist threat. Some people call it a worldwide conspiracy to enslave the whole world. If communism would leave us alone and present no threat to our freedom, we could study it rather passively. If it is a threat to our freedom, we ought to know about it and devote more time and effort to the study of it. What evidence is available to us? As usual, history is fairly reliable as a teacher. Let's look at the record. In 1917, in a cafe in Geneva, Switzerland, an ambitious man with an almost religious fervor sat writing. For many years he had been in exile from his native land, Russia. He lived for the day when he would be called to direct world affairs. He was the leader of a small Marxist group, the Bolsheviks, a section of the Russian Socialist Democratic Labor Party. To most of the Marxists, he was considered an extremist, sincere, but dangerous. His given name was Vladimir Ulyanov, but he is better known to the world as Lenin. Throughout Russia and in prisons around the world, he had about 40,000 scattered followers, devoted to their leader, equally fanatical and dedicated to the ideas of revolution and world conquest. World War I was in progress. Germany was battling the Allies to the west, while at the same time fighting Imperial Russia to the east. Suddenly, in February 1917, the world was astonished by the news that the Tsar had been dethroned. The socialist revolutionary leader Kerensky headed the newly born republic, and a parliament was established. The followers of Bolshevism hastened to the center of the new revolution, Petrograd, later renamed Leningrad. Germany was, of course, interested in doing anything which would minimize or eliminate having to fight Russia on her eastern front. Lenin traveled by armored train across embattled Germany to his native land, Russia, with the aid, permission, and help of Germany. Joseph Stalin returned to Russia from his Siberian exile and was to play an important role in the future of communism. Trotsky returned to Russia from his Canadian concentration camp. On his arrival, Lenin announced to the other non-Bolshevik revolutionaries that he alone, supported by his Bolshevik band, would conquer and rule the whole of Russia. They considered him mad, but they viewed him with fear and distrust. Zealously and ruthlessly, Lenin set to work to make his boast come true. In April, he renamed the Bolshevik section of the Russian Socialist Democratic Labor Party as the Communist Party of Russia. In October 1917, the Communists under Lenin organized a second revolution, brutally overwhelming the infant Socialist Republic of Kerensky. Lenin became the greatest power in Russia. At first, Lenin and his communists only held control of the capital, but by 1922, they had extended their control to all of Russia by infiltration and terror. The murder, rape, pillage, and looting was reminiscent of the days of Genghis Khan, centuries before. Then came to pass the modern miracle. An expansive program of control and conquest was initiated, which was successful to a degree which perhaps astounded even the communist leaders. History records no movement growing, consolidating, then expanding again, as has communism done unceasingly since 1917. Lenin was to die in 1924. But before his death, he was to make and start the plans which would eventually affect the whole world. What was the master plan which he would leave to his followers for the fulfillment of communism? Paraphrasing Lenin's words, this is his plan.
First, we shall take Eastern Europe. Next, the masses of Asia. Then we shall encircle that last bastion of capitalism, the United States of America. We shall not have to attack. It will fall like an overripe fruit into our hands.
Does that send icy fingers down your spine? Perhaps you say to yourself, many madmen make such plans, but nothing comes of it. Let us see again from history to what degree Lenin's plans were just the ravings of a madman. In 1903, Lenin had established Bolshevism with only 17 followers. By 1917, as we have noted before, he had about 40,000 followers. Before he died in 1924, he controlled all of Russia. Today, the forces of communism are in absolute control of about 1/3 of the Earth's population, about 1 billion human beings. So we see that in less than 50 years, really an instant of time in history, the communists have multiplied the number of human beings under their total control by 2,500,000%. To fulfill Lenin's plans for world conquest, the communists have only to multiply the number of human beings under their control by 3. A student of communism has suggested that anyone who is not startled and profoundly alarmed by these figures is evidently free from the responsibilities of rational comprehension. Let's interrupt our study of the history of communism to see what it involves to have achieved so much in so little time. An individual who had been called to share his knowledge of communism with a government committee studying the problem told them this. Communism is a set of rules that governs a way of life. Soviet communism involves both emotions and ideals, a duality which communist leaders persistently exploit. Communism demands from its adherents complete mental and emotional subservience. They follow, in effect, a perversion of the commandment, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." They demand absolute domination over every realm of life, and seek to liquidate all whom they can neither persuade nor compel into submission. Because of this, the communist leaders must exercise very tight controls over their subjects. Were communism simply and only a religion, we would not need to be so concerned. But this dialectic theory, which Marx and Engels borrowed from Hegel, affects the institutions of government and economics and the totality of conditions under which men live. And this does affect us. What are some of the ideas that communism embraces? Important to us is the fact that communism advances atheism. They say there's no God except the state. Karl Marx called religion, in the sense that you and I think of it, the opiate of the people. He meant two things. A, that religion is used by the ruling classes to keep people content with their lot. And B, that the people themselves use religion to deaden the pain of existence under the exploitation of capitalism. How does this compare with your ideas? Lenin said,
"Down with religion. Long live atheism. The spread of atheism is our chief task."
Since communism rejects God, the source of virtue, ethics, and morality, they become purely materialistic in their views concerning man, which leads us to another basic belief of communism: dialectical materialism. So as not to use complicated words, let's reduce that one to something we can understand and handle. Dialectical means merely the logic of conflict, and materialism means dealing with material things. So we reduce dialectical materialism to mean a logic of conflict which recognizes only the material things of the world. As we saw earlier in our two worlds comparison, this kind of thinking says, man is an animal, perhaps a higher form of animal, but still only an animal. He is nothing more than physical matter in motion. His total motion is that of struggle and conflict. They say that out of man's conflict, man rises to new and better positions. But, they say, individual man is insignificant. The individual must be subordinated to collective man, in order that mankind may be improved to the point that the final dream of a perfect society, the communist utopia, may be realized. We should recognize some of the fancy ideas used sometimes in connection with this struggle and conflict idea of logical materialism. The communist philosophers say that at a given moment certain conditions exist. They call this thesis. The conflict and struggle against this condition they call antithesis. Whatever new set of conditions results from the struggle and conflict they call synthesis. Another of communism's basic ideas is what they call economic determinism. Now, what do you suppose they mean by that? Well, they say that all of man's individual actions are determined by the economic environment or conditions in which he lives. And they say that for the most part, man has little or no control over these conditions. Hence, the individual really is not responsible for his own thoughts and actions. He's merely tossed around by his environment like a straw in the wind. They also say that heredity is of little or no influence in human character. Isn't that convenient? Under this theory, no matter what we do, we can just say it was our economic environment that made us do it. We're really not to blame ourselves. We're not responsible. Marx and Engels maintain that the institutions of society down through history were established by economic factors. Whatever the economic conditions, religion, customs, and law evolved to protect the existing economic order. They claim that these institutions served the interests of the landowning class only. So we have looked at three of the basic ideas contained in communism: atheism, denial of God; dialectical materialism, or the logic which recognizes only the material things of the world; and economic determinism, which rids man of individual responsibility for his acts and blames the environment. Those who accept the communist philosophy do so with religious fervor and missionary zeal. Anything required to accomplish world domination is good, whether it be mass murder, torture, lying, deceit, or human slavery, so long as it advances the cause of communism. We can see the difficulty of dealing with, working with, or negotiating with such a force which neither recognizes nor accepts any of the moral, ethical ground rules of our way of life. The great central theme in communist life is faith. Faith in communist promises, in communist ideals, faith that a communist utopia is in sight. And this faith is required of all its followers with no deviations permitted, according to the interpretations of the communist leaders, which interpretations are termed the party line. Today, communism is a conversation piece to many people. There are so many aspects of communism about which we can talk: its theory, threat, subversion, deceit, advance, and history. As with any conversation piece, it's not necessary to know too much about the subject if all we intend to do is to talk about it. If we want to do something about it, that's quite another matter. If all we're going to do is talk back in an abstract or academic way, we needn't offend anyone, even the communists. Communists only become disturbed with those who actually do something to upset their plans. An example. In December 1959, Khrushchev made a speech in Budapest, Hungary, in which he proudly boasted of the Soviet success in brutally suppressing the Hungarians' bid for freedom. He concluded his speech with these remarks.
3 years have elapsed since the counter-revolution in Hungary, but international reactionary circles still seek to have the so-called Hungarian question discussed in the United Nations. Let them have it as a souvenir, if this consoles them.
It is no wonder that his remarks were followed by applause and laughter from his communist audience. Communists do not care what is said about them, so long as nothing effective is done to interfere with their plans for world conquest. And we have done far too little.